ensuring that patients exercise their own autonomy. Oklahoma statute required a vaginal ultrasound in some cases because there will be circumstances in which a vaginal ultrasound provides a clearer image than an abdominal one. Thus, the law required women to submit to a vaginal penetration without consent. This is a violation of bodily integrity and brings up the disturbing connotations of rape. In 2011, Texas followed Oklahoma and amended its basic counseling statute to require that an ultrasound be performed at least 24 hours before the abortion. The provider is also required to display the sonogram image in the manner that the pregnant woman may view then. Explain the ultrasound image, make the embryonic or fetal heartbeat audible, and provide a verbal explanation of the sound. The North Carolina legislature enacted a similar law over Governor Beverly Perdue's veto in 2011. The laws in all three of these states apparently require that patients listen to a description of the ultrasound or the heartbeat even if they don't want to. This takes the choice of what information the patient will receive away from the physician and the patient.
May I inquire of my fellow Missourian?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So, my name is Alex Townsend. I live in Columbia, Missouri. I'm originally from Texas. And I'm here today because I believe that women should have control over their bodies and decisions about their health care should be made between them, their family, and their physician. And I was so inspired to see the women start this filibuster earlier this week on Monday at 2 p.m. And it's going to be ending later this afternoon at 2 p.m. after a full 72 hours, which is just incredible. I'm originally from Texas, so I'm going to read a little bit here from the indomitable Molly Ivins, and it's her column from a paper when she was writing in Texas called "Legal Answers Won't Resolve Abortion Fight." Far away from the screaming demonstrators and screaming counter-demonstrators so hopelessly divided over a woman's right to choose to have an abortion, away from the television cameras and the posturing, away from the pushing and shoving and harassed cops, in the solemn, quiet hush of the Supreme Court, the only action that really counts on abortion took place last week. Those who witnessed it said the atmosphere was curiously deflated. They felt none of the tension and suppressed excitement that normally accompanies major arguments before the court. The Pennsylvania case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, turns on 5 restrictions on women who choose to have abortions. One of them patently silly. One potentially devastating for a few minors, and the others apparently reasonable, or at least, as the law puts it, not unduly burdensome on the surface. On reading the transcript of that argument, I felt, and Sarah Weddington, this Texas lawyer who argued Roe v. Wade in 1972 and who was in the court last week, confirms, that perhaps the critical moments occurred when 2 judges asked essentially the same question. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor asked the woman lawyer for the American Civil Liberties Union, and Justice Harry Blackmun asked the male Attorney General of Pennsylvania, in Blackmun's words, "Have you read Roe?" It is a bit like trying to bail out the ocean with a teaspoon to try making this point again and again in the face of so many people who are convinced otherwise, but Roe v. Wade did not give women the right to abortion on demand. Roe sets up a trimester framework in which the state's interest in protecting fetal life increases as the fetus becomes viable, able to live outside the womb. Only the mother's life or health takes precedence over the fetal life in the 3rd trimester. The 2 most troubling restrictions in the Pennsylvania law are requirements that a married woman inform her husband and that minor women get the consent of their parents before they can have abortions. You could sort of see the justices goggling at the first requirement. O'Connor wanted to know if there were First Amendment implications in compelling speech. She also asked about the First Amendment implications of compelling doctors, as the Pennsylvania law does, to describe a great long list of fetal development options and the social services. The best information available indicates that 95% of married women seeking abortions do inform their husbands, as the vast majority of teenagers also inform at least one parent. If they have one, they can find. The problem is with the exception and the sometimes tragic consequences of state-ordered communication. A woman legislator in Pennsylvania, when the Notify Your Husband provision was being debated, proposed a law that would require husbands to notify their wives before having an affair. Her point, of course, was the absurdity of the law requiring communication in a family where communication is broken down. The Pennsylvania law is silly in that it dates its own requirements. The exceptions to the husband notification requirement are medical emergency, when the husband is not the father of the child. "I'm going to have an abortion, dear, but don't worry, it's not your child." When the husband cannot be found, when the pregnancy is the result of reported sexual assault, or when the woman believes it is likely she will be physically abused. Somehow, all this, according to the Pennsylvania Attorney General, will, quote, further the integrity of marriages. O'Connor was clearly intrigued by this odd discrimination involved. Unmarried women in Pennsylvania are not required to notify the fathers. If you have ever talked with minor girls who apply for the court's consent to get an abortion rather than notify their parents, you understand something of the wretched tangle of violence, incest, and physical abuse that afflicts so many families. When legislators go about putting restrictions on abortion, as though every family consisted of Ozzie and Harriet and 2 darling children, they add another terrible burden to the lives that are already almost unbearable. You cannot save the life of an unborn child by driving its mother to suicide. A particularly thoughtful letter to the editor last week noted that those on both sides of this issue who harass others and break the law do not have a commitment to a movement beyond meanness, and revenge against uppity women and or super righteous Christians. The feminists claim that many who profess to care for the unborn children are actually more interested in controlling the behavior of women is sometimes evidenced in the most comical ways. The Wall Street Journal carried an account of the Battle of Buffalo last week that included a vignette of a 69-year-old man shouting at a pro-choice woman, "You have a choice. Stop screwing around." Oh dear. Well, there are still a few people who think that's what's at stake. But far from a maddening crowd, where the majesty of the law comes into play, the issues, oddly, seem more nakedly clear. The only question is, who is to decide? The government or the individual? A government that has the power to make a woman bear a child she does not want also has the power to make her abort a child she does want. The two apparent polar opposites here, actually flip sides of the same coin, are China and Romania. In China, the government forces women to have abortions. In Romania, until recently, the government forced women to have one child after another with awful results. In both countries, there was state control over women's wombs. I would love to be able to split the difference on this terrible question, to be able to say in gooey Pollyanna fashion, let's all work together to prevent unwanted pregnancies. Settling the legal questions on this issue will not settle the moral ones, but I cannot believe it is wise to give government the power to make these decisions. What's incredible is as I was listening to the debate last night, and I was listening to primarily a bunch of men debate whether or not the government should regulate a woman's womb, I was just struck by the fact that several legislators were saying that they could speak for women, and I'll be quite honest, there's no man who can speak for me about my own healthcare decisions that I make between myself, my family, my partner, my doctor, and whatever spiritual entity I so believe in. So it's really interesting that we have folks in government who are trying to regulate my womb. So with that,
may I inquire with my fellow Missourian?
I yield to my fellow Missourian.